This video is intended for those who already know how to make a working tank, but don't necessarily have a grasp on how to make it combat effective. As such, I will be going over mostly concepts with examples and not many specifics. The first concept I'm going over is the iron triangle, and this is something that applies to real world tanks as well. Basically, the idea is we have this triangle here. In one corner we have firepower, in the next we have armor, and the third one we have mobility. The idea is that the more you lean into one of these, the harder it will be to get the others. For example, if you full spec into firepower, you'll find it difficult to add a lot of armor or have good mobility. An example would be the real world tank, the British FV4005, which has a massive 183mm gun, but very poor armor in the turret and poor mobility as well. If you want a full spec mobility, then of course you won't have much armor or firepower. An example would be the Panhard EVR. And if you want to have a ton of armor, you probably won't have a lot of firepower or mobility. A real world example would be the TOG 2. Now, you don't have to go into one of these corners. Much more common is going into two of these aspects while sacrificing the third one. The most common example is taking firepower and armor and sacrificing mobility. Examples would be the KV2, the Mouse, and the T95 or T28. If you want firepower and mobility, some examples would be the American Sheridan and other American World War II tank destroyers. On the last side, mobility and armor doesn't really exist in real life because it just doesn't really make sense. If you have armor, you're going to have a lot of weight, and it's going to make it very difficult to have a lot of mobility. So before you even begin designing a tank, you have to consider what part of the triangle you want to take. And another thing to keep in mind, especially if you're going the firepower or armor route, is that you don't necessarily need a turret. While a turret does provide you with, of course, 360-degree turret traverse, a case-made design allows you to fit a bigger gun or potentially more armor, due to the lack of a turret rotating mechanism, which takes up a lot of space. This next concept is something that I call armor stepping. Take a look at this. Here we have 4 crate big cannon guns, firing solid shot with 4 charges, armor piercing with 4 charges, solid shot with 8 charges, and armor piercing with 8 charges. 4 charge solid shot penetrates 1 block of steel armor, 4 charge armor piercing pierces 3 blocks of steel armor, 8 charge solid shot pierces 2 blocks of steel armor, and 8 charge armor piercing pierces 4 blocks. Let's take a look at the 4 charge armor piercing shell. It doesn't matter if you have 1, 2, or 3 blocks of armor, it's going to depend on all of them. Any amount of armor 3 blocks and below is useless and only adds weight to your tank. So what can we do about it? All we have to do is add 1 block of armor more than the gun can pierce. Now your opponent has to hit exactly the same spot twice in order to pen. Using what we just learned, let's go over how to optimally armor up a tank. So we have the cross section of this M1 Abrams, so just cut down like this, and so the concrete is just the parts that we need to protect, and the orange is the turret, red is the hull. So basically we just want to start by going over the whole thing in 1 layer of armor, and even though this won't stop many tank shots, this will defend you from small arms fire, and also makes it a lot tougher for your adversary to decide where to shoot, compared to if you just had exposed internals. So next I want to actually remove this part so we can lay some tracks here, and then we'll armor up like this. So this is only 3 thick, but once we add some copycat panels, we're going to have 4 thick armor, which will stop most things, except for 8 charge armor piercing. But even then it can stop 8 charge armor piercing if you're lucky. And we're going to do the same for front here, and we're actually going to leave this bottom part unarmored. And this is for good reason. Even at this very close angle, in order to actually hit anything inside the tank and damage it, it has to go through a bunch of layers of armor, and then even then the angle is very, very specific. So there's not a whole lot of risk of hitting the lower plate. Now we're going to want to armor up the turret here, the front of the turret, which is going to be taking a lot of the fire. And actually once this gun is assembled, we can go over it with some armor too. Historically, tank toss-up matches have ended mostly with shots to the front of the turret or the turret cheeks, so you definitely want to pay close attention to this part. And now for the rest of the tank, the top really doesn't matter. You're not going to be seeing a lot of top attack designs, so it's not that much of a concern. And the rear of the tank, you can honestly leave it unarmored. Enemy tanks should never be behind you in the first place, but you can throw onto the panels just to feel a little bit safer. On the topic of tank guns, there are a few kinds. There's a quickfire breach, the screw breach, and there's also a third kind, the sliding breach, but nobody likes it. Don't use it. While you can fire a quickfire breach very fast, of course, and it's also very easy to automate them, the screw breach is the only way to pack in more charges, which we've already demonstrated can give you a lot more pen. It's also possible to make screw breach autoloaders that rival the speed of a quickfire breach. And while I can't exactly teach how to make an autoloader, my best advice is to just try it for yourself and see what you get. The next concept is that of tank crew roles. because at the end of the day, someone has to actually pilot the thing. I would highly recommend having at least a driver and a loader gunner, and having a designated loader if possible. If you happen to have a fourth person, they can act as tank commander and also control something like a roof MG for anti-infantry and tank suppression. Now let's talk about the three main roles, excluding the tank commander. The loader has the easiest job by far. All they have to do is ram shells into the gun. The gunner's job is also fairly trivial. All they have to do is know how to operate the gun and know where to shoot on enemy tanks. The driver's job is by far the most nuanced. They have to have not only coordination but also map awareness and game sense. Their job is much more dependent on what's actually going on in the match and not quite as straightforward. Now let's go over armor use, which is mostly the driver's job. This is basically the act of using your armor as efficiently as possible to block shots. Let's say you're presented with this very common situation in which an enemy tank is right around the corner. What should you do? A lot of people would turn their tank 90 degrees sideways, pull out, shoot the enemy tank, and then back up into cover. This is bad for a few reasons. Not only are you giving your enemy a huge target, but also the sides of a tank tend to be quite thinly armored. Instead, what we can do is angle ourselves like this and back out before taking a shot. Not only do we present a much smaller profile to the enemy, but in order for a shell to actually hit anything, it has to travel through 3 or 4 blocks of armor instead of just one. But what if we're the one shooting? Where should we aim? You have a few options to cripple or incapacitate an enemy tank. Your first option is to go straight through the front of the turret and either destroy their autoloader or kill their loader if they have one. This also works well if they happen to have manual controls in the turret or other mechanisms. Another option is to aim for the turret ring, where the cannon mount usually is. Disabling the gun obviously will pretty much win you the match. If you do some investigation and the enemy tank happens to have some stuff in the front of the hull, then of course you can aim there. The front of the hull is usually overlooked by a lot of players in terms of armor, and so it's generally a pretty good place to shoot, but only if there's stuff there that will incapacitate their tank. Because remember, shooting armor does nothing. You have to actually hit something inside the tank and destroy it in order to cripple it. If you happen to have an open shot into the side, I would always recommend going for the engine. Taking out their engine removes their ability to drive, turret reverse, and if they're using diesel engines, it can even explode. Oh my god. Now let's see how our gunnery tips apply to this M4 Sherman. You can see that the cannon mount and actually the bearing for the turret are quite high, and so going through the front of the turret would be a pretty wise choice. This tank also uses a manual loader, so there's a good chance that you might be able to hit them if you pen the front of the turret. The front of the hull has nothing to offer, there's just some armor there. Shooting that would do nothing. If you get through to the side or rear, the engine is actually quite far forward and spaced out from the back of the tank, so just know that you'll have to aim a little bit differently if you want to hit it. So now I want to actually go over how to make your tank look good, how to decorate it and all that. So here's my M1 Abrams. It is probably the best looking tank I've ever made. And the first step in making your tank look good is to pick a camo. It's going to add a lot of texture to your tank. Make it less bland with big open patches like this where there's no decoration on it. So this first one is a tan, green, and brown. Used this a lot on World War II German tanks. And for this one, you want big splotches like this of every color. Because that's just sort of the style that they had. For this sand one, just do colors, tan and slightly lighter tan. It really doesn't matter, just do whatever you want with this one. This one here, with 4 colors, is a kind of woodland color, woodland camo. I would want slightly smaller splotches than that one over there. Same thing over here, slightly smaller splotches. And for this snow camo, which is 3 colors, you actually don't want them to group up at all. So you can see that it's just kind of little flecks of the gray here on the white. And all these camos are going to be made using the Steel Armor Blocks mod, which will have linked in the description. And then this block here is the Iron Sheet Metal from Camo And Deco. So beyond camo texturing, we have a few bits here that you can use to spruce up the outside of your tank. So this first one is the towing cable that you see on the outside of a lot of tanks. It's just going to be a shaft with metal brackets on it, and then some cage lamps here to act as the connectors on each end. This train hull can be used really simply as a spare road wheel, as you see in the Abrams, and a lot of them have this IRL as well. This cage here, you also see on a lot of tanks, and usually this is used to hold in place the soldiers' belongings and any cargo, fuel that they might be carrying, tools and stuff like that. And same goes for these balloons from Eureka. These are just going to act as a sack or some other kind of bag on the outside of your tank. This vault, I don't really know what it represents, but it looks good. You can use it in a lot of places. It just has a interesting texture and a nice color that goes well with a lot of things. For autocannons, even if it's not functional, I would highly recommend having one on the top of your tank. It really looks nice, and it's also realistic because a lot of tanks had roof MGs for anti-air and dealing with infantry. So these shafts here are just in some metal brackets, and they look like spare track linkages on the outside of your tank when you set them set up like this. So just make sure that they're vertical like this. If they're facing the other way, it looks a little bit strange. So yeah, that was my guide on how to improve your Minecraft tanks. I really hope you found it useful, and I'd really appreciate it if you could like and or subscribe. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.